Why did Jesus come into the world 2,000 years ago? Why 2,000 years ago? That's a question that is not easy to answer. History is complex. That's why it is generally hard to understand why exactly things happen and how everything is connected. And it is still more difficult to understand God's plan in all of that. We simply don't have the right vantage point for it. It's a bit like this example. If I'm in a city sitting in my car in a traffic jam, I might ask myself why there is all this traffic. From my perspective, I might be able to see that all the streets around me are jammed, but I can't see the reasons for it. To be able to see them, I'd have to have a different vantage point. I'd have to be able to see everything from above. Then maybe I'd see that on one street there's a parade, on another a construction zone, and on a third a camel is blocking the crosswalk. All of these things have an effect on traffic and my being stuck in it, but from my position, I simply cannot see them. This whole scenario is similar to when we try to understand any of God's actions in history. It is not possible. We lack a good vantage point. We would need to be able to see things from above. There's one thing, however, that we can say about this question. God came into this world at the fullness of time, as Scripture puts it. What does this mean? Well, it means that God prepared mankind for his coming into the world, and for this a few things were necessary. The very first thing that people had to grasp was that there was only one God, and that this God doesn't reside in fire, lightning, or thunder, but is completely different from the world. Then people had to realize that this God did not reside in images of wood and stone manipulated through food offerings and sacrifices. Man had to understand that communion with God comes about by a certain way of life, and not through voodoo rituals or shamanism. They had to come to an understanding that the change of human heart was something interior and could not be brought about by external laws, regardless of how good those laws were in themselves. Man had to acknowledge that a true conversation of the heart was beyond his own powers and that he needed divine intervention, a Redeemer who would restore mankind. These things and more man had to grasp and internalize so that the incarnation would be able to reach what it set out to accomplish. And so the whole history of Revelation appears to be a rather tedious process that unfolded itself through the ages of men. But at the fullness of time, as Scripture says, God came into this world and became man. From our rather limited perspective and vantage point, we can only speculate on why it all happened precisely some 2,000 years ago. But as with all things pertaining to God's plan, including His plan for our own life, we will only be able to understand and comprehend everything when we have changed our vantage point, and in our final communion with God, we'll be able to look at it from above, as it were.